Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2025 Oregon Instructional Materials Briefing for Social Science. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the announcements and notices page on the Oregon Department of Education website. Before I begin, I do want to clarify that this webinar is intended for publishers, vendors, creators of instructional materials that might be interested in submitting their materials for evaluation this year. And again, that is for the content area, social science, which we'll talk more about the categories in a few slides. If you are a district or ESD partner, you are more than welcome to continue to attend and to stay here, learn more about the process on the back end. However, this presentation will be largely technical in nature. And since you all are very busy in the work you do supporting our students, feel free to hop off if you feel this content is not for you. Also know that it is recorded, so you'll be able to come back and review it later if you want to skim through and see what's pertinent to you. We are going to ask that everyone stays muted. You have been muted automatically, and that the Q&A or questions are saved until the end. So if you go ahead and put anything in the chat throughout this presentation, Jenna and I will monitor it as we go through to make sure, like, if it's something quick and timely we can answer, we'll answer it in the moment. Otherwise, we'll keep it until the end and hopefully have time to answer that in our Q&A. During this webinar, we will be giving an overview of Oregon's review and adoption of instructional materials. This includes going over the timeline for this year's review and adoption, as well as taking a look at all of the required and optional forms that we will ask to be submitted. Some of you, like I said, might have already gone through this process. I see lots of familiar names on the call. And for others, this might be brand new information. So hang with us, whether you are somebody returning or you are a new individual looking at going through this process. We will hope that this webinar will ensure everyone has an understanding of what the process is going to look like. Again, the webinar is being recorded, so if you do miss something, you're welcome to go back. We will send it all to all registrants as well as everybody who is here later this week. And by this week, I mean it's Friday, so probably early next week. All right, we're going to get started with the statutes and the rules that drive Oregon's process. And I think one of the things that is important to note is that our Oregon Revised Statute is driven by our legislature. So those are statutes that through our legislative process can be revised, they can be added, they can be removed. But as an agency, as well as our State Board of Education, we don't have a lot of leeway around what those statutes say. Administrative rules can be changed under the authority of our State Board of Education, and that's a process that takes between 6 months and a year. That being said, Oregon's adoption process is outlined in both statute and an administrative rule. Oregon Revised Statute Chapter 337 instructs the State Board of Education to adopt a list of instructional materials annually. Chapter 581, Division 11 of Administrative Rules in Oregon further details the process ranging from the composition of our review committees to what kind of materials can be adopted by the State Board. In Administrative Rule, only basal or core instructional materials will be evaluated and adopted. So this excludes supplemental materials, intervention materials, and APIB materials. In rule, the definition of basal or comprehensive is a major instructional vehicle, which may include instructional materials such as hardbound or softbound book or books, set or kits of print and non-print materials, including electronic and internet or web-based materials and media. Another way to think of this is a foundational program, the core component of instruction, what we refer to sometimes as the major instructional vehicle of a school's curriculum for their teaching to the academic content standards. Our State Board of Education adopted materials list offers numerous benefits, both for school districts in Oregon and publishers of instructional materials. It does help us to ensure that districts have a list of high quality materials to select from without having to conduct an independent adoption. And in Oregon, we are a local control state. Districts only have two options: to adopt from our list or to conduct an independent adoption. Independent adoptions come with a list of, I think, 7 requirements that would be completed by Oregon Department of Education if the materials are on our list. So a lot of districts in Oregon, we estimate around 75 to 80%, depending on grade banding content area, adopt from the list. They might have district policies that require them to adopt from ODE's list because their school board wants their resources to be used effectively. They don't think independent adoption is a way to do that. So both for publishers and for districts, the list gives them a place to connect where they can find materials without having to go through that heavy lift. Additionally, publishers will have a contract with ODE that will allow schools to use these materials for the contracted period. And we can talk more about the contract as we go through the process. However, it does provide security for both the vendor and for our districts that are going through the process of adopting and implementing materials. One of the things that I think is the best about our process is the feedback loop that is created. So we do conduct our evaluation during the summer. It's a pretty fast and furious process, just based off of the time educators have out of the classrooms during the summer. However, we do have a feedback system where publishers, regardless of whether they pass or don't pass, will receive high quality feedback statements on each of the criterion that they score less than a perfect on. And we also encourage our evaluators to still provide feedback, even if the publisher does receive perfect scores, so that you all get the information you need to make your products better in the next iterations. Additionally, with that, the publisher has a chance to respond. In that response, the publisher can come in and they can provide citations, supplemental resources that a district might consider. And we've also had some of our publishers come in and say, hey, this was great feedback from our evaluation committees. We have an update, like a patch update coming out in XYZ, and we have taken this feedback into consideration. So it gives an asynchronous way for vendors to really communicate with the districts, as well as evaluators to communicate with the districts. And then finally, all of our score sheets are posted to our webpage. So all of the scores are easily accessible. We've also evolved our spreadsheet to include information like whether or not the materials are available in a different language, which just helps districts at a glance see the materials and make informed selections. All right. On this slide, we're going to go over the timeline. And Oregon's adoption of instructional materials occurs over the course of 1 year. This slide highlights the major events that happen in each given month. Publisher Notice 1 included the announcement of social science as the content area up for adoption in the Circular of Information. And many of you likely have already seen that as it was released last month. It might be one of the ways that you also received information about this webinar. This month, the Publisher's Briefing, which is where we are today, provides an overview of the adoption process and the instructional materials requirements that we have to all interested publishers. Additionally, our first deliverable, which are the information request forms, are due today. If you do need more time to get this in, please go ahead and get in touch with me, and I'll go ahead and make sure that my email address is in the chat. So you can reach out to me directly and we will go ahead and see what we can do about giving you an extension. Although I will note this is a pretty simple form. So if you feel like you want to be a part of the evaluation potentially, I suggest just getting it in. As we'll talk about in a few sentences even, there is a withdrawal date. So getting in that information request form isn't a signing on a signature in ink saying that you're going to be a part of the evaluation. Next month, publishers that have submitted those forms and are interested in participating in the process will need to submit the completed proposal form as well as their bid sheets. The bid sheet process will include at least one-to-one or one to however many people are on your team conversation with our instructional materials coordinator. And I will note, especially for those who have been around for a few years, you've seen me as instructional materials coordinator. You've seen Jenna as instructional materials coordinator. We are both in new positions and we are hiring for instructional materials coordinator. So we'll be working with that individual as they are hired to do those bid sheet conversations, make sure that everything is aligned to the administrative rule around fee system. And again, that will be our instructional materials coordination team with your team meeting to ensure that the submissions that you have are assessed at the proper fee. We'll also discuss any corrections that we might need to make as we move forward. Please note, if you are submitting an open educational resource or OER in its free use format, you may be exempt from payment of a submission fee. So you'll need to notify us through a written request via email by March 7th of 2025 for us to look at your fee waiver application. Sorry, totally lost my train of thought. For you to be considered for that fee waiver. You'll receive the fee waiver application, the official one we have, as well as further information about what that process looks like upon submission and receiving the official request. OER materials are reviewed and held to the same requirements as any other materials with regards to all required forms as well as participation throughout our process. And Jenna went ahead and put that fee assessment rule in the chat, so thank you. Next, I'd like to emphasize that April 18th, 2025 is our official withdrawal date for publishers who do not wish to participate further. This is important because the bid sheet invoices will be processed in May and they can only be reversed prior to the deadline of April 18th. If you would withdraw after the April 18th deadline, the organization that you represent will be responsible for payment of the bid sheet invoice. In June, invoice payments are due no later than the 20th. Payments must be received by this deadline, otherwise materials will not be evaluated. Committee members will convene in the month of July to evaluate all submitted materials. And we'll go into further detail about what that review week looks like in a further slide. Publishers will receive official notification of their scores by mid-August. At the October 2025 State Board of Education meeting, the list of approved publishers as well as their programs will be presented and recommended for adoption. Approved publishers will then receive their contracts and bond forms to be executed and returned by the first week of December. Also due at this time is the required accessibility conformance report, and details about that requirement can be found in the circular of information that was released in January. Publisher notice 1 and number 2, as well as subsequent notices, will include the 2025 Oregon adoption process timeline that has been linked in the chat. That will also be available on the announcements and notices webpage. Please note that this timeline document is subject to change pending finalization of our evaluation details, like whether we're in person, hybrid, virtual, the exact dates of review week, etc. So pretty close to permanent, but small shifts can happen as we get closer to that evaluation. An effort will be made to inform all publishers who are part of this process of any changes to the timeline document as soon as it's been made. This slide gives you a nice, colorful visual representation of the process that I just described. So if you're a screenshotter or a picture taker, feel free to hop in, but we'll make sure these slides and the recording get to you as well. All right. So I think that you are likely aware at this point, but 2025 is our adoption year for social science, and that is K-12. So the categories for social science adoption are listed on the slide, and that's a K-5 category, a 6-8 category, and 4 categories for high school, domain specific, one being history, another being civics and government, the next being geography, and the last being economics. The first page of the circular of information also lists these categories as how the materials will be submitted for the evaluation and adoption process. As you can see, the categories are majorly in those grade bands of opposed to the individual grade level. On the information request form, it asks you to estimate the number of submissions that your organization will be submitting to the process for each category. And just to be clear, how we define submission is all of the materials needed to cover grade band academic content standards for that category. So for example, I intend to submit my materials for middle school. All of the materials and their ancillaries for grades 6, 7, and 8 should be listed as one submission under category 2. So another way to look at submission is potentially the program title or the program series name for that grade band. If you've already submitted your information request form and potentially indicated that you had 3 or 4 submissions in one category or in one grade band, that is okay. Feel free to reach back out to us, and we are happy again to amend that form and make sure that we have accurate representation of what your organization intends to submit. So please feel free to email our ODE email or myself with a correction, and we'll ensure that the bid is accurately reflected in our records. You may have also noticed, as I mentioned before, there is no category for AP or IB programs. ODE does not review or adopt AP or IB materials during this adoption cycle. We have not done AP or IB materials historically, so this is not a shift, and we do not foresee at this time evaluating AP or IB materials moving forward. So with all of that technical dry stuff out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to our content expert, the Amit, and he'll let you know more about the criteria.
Okay, thank you very much, Anjali and Jenna. Thanks everyone for being here. So just talking about the criteria, you can see sort of the headline or outlines of the criteria there. Part 1 of the criteria focuses on specific alignment to the 2025 social science standards. This section is designed to ensure that the materials align to all of the new standards and that all the materials support the development of social science disciplinary practices. And so you'll see that in the standards themselves. I think Jenna will put a link, if she hasn't already shared, a link for the new social science standards. Part 2 of the criteria is designed to ensure that the materials are equitable and culturally responsive. They've been, you'll see sort of the items mentioned there. ODE has the opportunity and responsibility to elevate the kind of the pedagogical moves to assist educators as they're utilizing these new instructional materials. Within part 2 of the social science criteria, we need to see opportunities for authentic student-driven learning through the metrics of relevance, collaborative learning, and adaptability to support individual students. We'll also need to utilize multiple frames of reference with multiple perspectives and points of view as well. In part 3 is our technical usability. We included support for both educators and students along with digital learning design as it draws on the experiences from teaching the past few years with the move towards technology. Here the criteria focus on supporting guidance for educators in addition specific supports for diverse needs of all of our learners. And within part 4 of the assessment criteria, we strive to better align with the formative assessment practices, specifically looking for quality performance assessments, integration of good assessment practices with content instruction, and communication support to provide information to families.
Awesome. Thanks, Amit. All right, I'm going to take it from here. So we are now going to discuss the required documents that will need to be submitted throughout this process in a little bit more detail. The first document, as Anjali mentioned before, the information request form was included with notice number 1, which can be found on that announcements and notices page that's linked in the chat. The second 4 documents, the proposal form, the summary form, the quality criteria documentation templates, and the bid spreadsheet, will be included in publisher notice number 2. The first form, the information request form, is due today, but again, as Anjali mentioned, let me know if you need more time and we can make accommodations. Although, again, it is a very simple form. So if you have any interest in applying, I just recommend you fill that out and get that submitted. So first, let's talk about the proposal form. This form is essentially an agreement between ODE and the publishing company for 2 major areas. First, the distribution and handling of proposed instructional materials for the social science adoption, as well as second, your agreement with all laws and rules related to the review and adoption of your proposed instructional materials. This includes the agreement to comply with all deadlines and any consequences that may arise as a result of not meeting those deadlines. If you are submitting multiple submissions within one category, I do want you to note that you will need to submit a completed proposal form for each program, series, or title. So some of you may be submitting multiple proposal forms. The proposal form is due on March 7th and will be released with announcement number 2. The next form is the bid spreadsheet. The bid spreadsheet is an Excel file with individual tabs for each category. The first tab has annotations or instructions that give you directions on how to complete the bid spreadsheet. So just be aware of that. The first draft of the bid spreadsheet is due on March 21st, and this will also be posted with announcement number 2, which will come out very soon. The next form is the summary form. The summary form asks you to provide a description of your submission and NIMAS assurance for accessibility. Please complete this form for each submission in all categories that you will be submitting materials. The summary form is due by June 20th, which you'll note on the publisher timeline is a pretty big due date. Including within the summary form should be the submission of the quality criteria documentation. And this is essentially a template that will be given to you so that you can document how your materials conform to the adoption criteria, which is hugely helpful for our evaluators. Further instructions and the template will be included with publisher notice number 2. Notice number 3 will include publisher presentation guidelines and a request for digital logins. You must provide access codes for electronic submissions or electronic versions of your materials in order for reviewers to fully evaluate your submission. Instructions and further information will be included in publisher notice number 4. The MSST forms B and M are required for all submitted instructional materials. These are statements of assurance and how your materials conform to the standards and specifications set for textbooks. Instructions and further information about these forms will be included in publisher notice number 4. Additionally, and Anjali mentioned this earlier, but I do want to call it out as it's a newish requirement, publishers are required to submit an accessibility conformance report. Information on how to prepare an accessibility conformance report was included in the circular of information, which can be found on the announcements and notices page, and I highly recommend you review that. The accessibility conformance report will be due no later than December 5th, which I know seems like a long way away, but I want to note that accessibility conformance reports can sometimes take a long time to prepare, and it requires coordination with a third-party reviewer. So I encourage publishers to get started on that process as soon as possible if your team doesn't have accessibility conformance reports ready already. Now that we've discussed the required documents, I will now discuss the optional documents that can be submitted in this process. The first is the alignment or correlation sheets of your materials to the Oregon Social Science Standards. It is encouraged that you provide this optional document as it really helps our reviewers see how your materials align to our state standards. It's a really helpful guidance for them as they evaluate multiple sets of materials. The next is research-based documentation. This can include how your materials have helped students attain the content knowledge of your program. Note that you will be limited to a maximum of 2 pages per program, front and back, with font no smaller than 10 point. Both of these optional documents will be due by June 20th. Now, I've discussed the timeline and required and optional documents of the Oregon review process. You may be wondering who will be reviewing your materials as part of Oregon's review. So there are very specific requirements related to our evaluation committees laid out in Oregon Administrative Rule. Chapter 581, Division 11 of Oregon Administrative Rule requires that at least 75% of the review committee be currently practicing Oregon teachers, with the remaining 25% being school administrators or other stakeholders knowledgeable of the grade level and subject under evaluation, in this case, social science. Oregon is still determining whether to utilize a hybrid format or in-person format for this year's evaluation. Publishers will give a presentation of the materials to the review committee as well as a Q&A, and a determination is still being made about whether to utilize in-person or virtual format for that as well. We will notify you as soon as that determination is made, though, so because I know travel accommodations can be tricky. Evaluators will actually review the materials during the month of July. Publishers will be required to provide 1 full set of materials for reviewers to have access to the full program and submission so that they can evaluate it. Further information, including schedules, dates, and times and locations, will be provided by notice number 4 in May, so no later than May. Once you have submitted all documents, paid the invoice amount, and presented to the reviewers, how will your submission actually be evaluated? So the submissions are evaluated using the social science adoption criteria and Oregon standards. A committee of educators, school district staff, and content experts developed the adoption criteria. As part of your submission process, like I mentioned earlier, you will be required to document how your materials conform to the social science adoption criteria and standards with the quality criteria documentation template. This will support evaluators as they review your materials. And I just want you to know, as you plan right now, Section 1 and 2 of the criteria are our non-negotiable criteria, meaning that you must meet or exceed each individual metric within those sections of the criteria in order to pass the review and be recommended for adoption. Reviewers will score your submission using an instructional materials evaluation tool, also known as the IMET, which is developed from the criteria. Essentially takes the adoption criteria and turns it into a scoreable rubric. The IMET is still in development, but will be released no later than the beginning of May, and we are hoping for much sooner. Based on your scores, your submission will be classified as either exemplary, meets, or does not meet. Official scores and comments will show why your materials scored the way they did, and these will be made available to the public on ODE's website. Publisher responses to our scores will also be included if provided by September 12th, 2025. So you'll be allowed an opportunity to issue a response as well. According to OAR, Chapter 581, Division 11, Rule 80, all approved publishers will enter into a contract with the Oregon Department of Education. Following the October State Board of Education meeting, approved and adopted publishers will be given a contract to be executed and returned to me by December 5th, 2024. In addition to the contract, publishers will also need to obtain a $10,000 performance bond or irrevocable letter of credit. Further instructions will be given at a later date to approved and adopted publishers.
Can I really quick hop in with something on that, Jenna? Can we
Yeah.
go back one slide?
Yeah.
So we do have a few of our publishers who are here who have been a part of our few last evaluations. And I think only the last one or two, we have allowed for a 1-year renewable letter of credit. That has since proven to not be an effective way for us to potentially collect on the bond if it lapses between year to year. So moving forward, my understanding is that we will be going back to a system where that letter of credit or that bond form needs to be signed for, and the term needs to be for the entire contract length. So just a heads up now, if you're one of the companies that had a hard time on short notice between December and February getting that bond or that letter of credit secured for the entire contract term, it might be a good idea to start that conversation with your financial institution or insurance company sooner in the process. So just a heads up on that. And please, Jenna, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for jumping in with that. That's a really good point. Yeah, the 1-year bonds they no longer work for us. Okay. All right, Northwest Textbook Repository. So approved publishers are mandated, according to the statute and rule on the screen, to work with Northwest Textbook Depository in furnishing textbooks to Oregon school districts. So once the Oregon State Board of Education adopts your program or programs, Northwest Textbook Depository will contact you regarding next steps. And towards the end of this presentation, I'll include Mark Hansen, who is the Northwest Textbook Depository rep. I'll include his contact information in the chat for you if you're curious to hear more about what they do. An explanation of services document was also included with publisher notice number 1. So that's also a good place to learn more about this requirement. Upon adoption of materials, publishers will be required to send one complete set of their full submission to the Hammersley Library, which is the official Oregon viewing site of instructional materials. The materials should be cataloged and available for viewing from the public no later than February 1st, 2026. And people do go to Hammersley Library to review instructional materials and see what might be a good fit for their school districts. So yeah, that is an important date. A determination is still being made about whether ODE will be putting on the instructional materials caravan. In the event that we do conduct the caravan, we will coordinate with Oregon's education service districts, and we may require a fee in order for publishers to participate in the caravan. The administrative rule on the slide provides the guidelines for publisher presentation, and you may reference it for further information. All approved publishers will be required to submit a video caravan of their approved program, which will be posted on the ODE website. Guidelines will be given at a later date to approved publishers, with a deadline for the video caravan set for November 14th, 2026. So we're moving that deadline up a little bit this year based on feedback that we've received from our district partners. All right, we are approaching the end to this presentation. I know this is so much information and a lot of it's very technical. So here are some really great resources that I highly recommend you review or sign up for. So first, the ODE instructional materials webpage. This is the main webpage to find information related to instructional materials for Oregon, including links to the adopted criteria, adopted instructional materials, all that sort of stuff. And I think Ajali is probably working on getting that in the chat. And then ODE's announcements and notices webpage, that was linked in the chat at the very beginning, but this is where publisher notices and other announcements related to the adoption of instructional materials will be posted. And then finally, I highly, if you have not yet, recommend signing up for our Oregon Instructional Materials Adoption Publisher Listserv. I'll send the announcements and notices that are posted to that ODE webpage through that listserv so that you are notified of those essential communications. So yeah, that is a great email chain to sign up for. Now with that, we are ready for questions that you have. And if you don't have questions, feel free to hop or linger just to listen. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
And also, if you have like very specific questions to your own organization or program, feel free to reach out to our email or ask us to get in touch with you in the chat, and we can do that as well.
Oh yeah, and I'll post our emails in the chat.
I'll always look to my two colleagues around wait time. I'm like, and we say, that's all we have. Happy Valentine's Day if you celebrate.
Wait time on Zoom is yeah, it's tricky. The recording will be posted on that announcements and notices webpage, and then I'll also send it out to everybody who registered for this event.
Crosswalks. Do we have any crosswalks, Amit? Sorry, you're muted.
I was going to shout out Charles' recognition of Oregon Statehood Day. Good work. And then you had a question about the crosswalks, Anjali?
Yeah, it looks like there was a question in the chat. Hi, when can we expect crosswalks to be ready?
Yes. Sorry. So for Tia, yes. So those should be coming onto the social science webpage at ODE pretty soon here. So I would say in the next couple of weeks before the IMET is released.
And I went ahead and dropped a link in the chat to that webpage if you don't already have it bookmarked. All right, friends. Well, here in Oregon, we got snow. So I don't know where you are, and it's either close to lunchtime or late afternoon on Friday and Valentine's Day. And for us, a snow day. So we will bid you all adieu. And just know if you do have any questions, feedback for us, you're more than welcome to get in touch, and we will be as responsive as possible. And look forward to getting to see you all soon during our bid sheet discussions.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.